South Africa's economy is officially in technical recession following 2 consecutive quarters of contracted growth. Stats SA reported that in the past 2 quarters, the economy shrank to a revised 2.6% and now 0.7% respectively. The rand took a nosedive, falling by more than 2% against the US dollar to trade at almost 15 rand 50 against the greenback. Our nominal GDP stands at 1.236 trillion. That's 52 billion rand more than in Q1. So what does this all mean? I mean, it's a whole bunch of numbers and recession. And to be honest with you, we've asked you on Twitter what you think this technical recession actually means and what is your understanding. And a lot of people have replied, we have no idea what this means. So let's bring Xhanti Payi into this conversation, and hopefully you're the man that can unravel all of this for us. So good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in.
It's good to be here, Leah.
Yeah, okay, so first and foremost, let's begin with the layman's term to describing what a recession is.
So a recession really means that we are actually producing less than we have before. So basically, and obviously over 2 quarters. So we measure GDP, or our actual our production on a quarterly basis. So each quarter we want to see if we are doing better than the last quarter. And then right up to the end of the year. And then we also want to see if we're doing better in this year than the previous year. Okay. And so in this case, it seems that on 2 consecutive quarters, things have been getting worse. And therefore, actually, people then decide that we are in recession, because actually it means we are going backwards.
Yeah, so that is not good news at all at the end of the day. I mean, when a country is in a recession, it's not good for the people of the country, it's not good for businesses, not good for economy, job creation. So there's a lot of effects that come with being in a technical recession. Can you talk to me about some of the ricochet effects?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, nobody wants to go backwards, right? We want to be actually constantly going forward. One of the key things we've seen, I mean, this is the 2nd quarter, which means actually this is something we've already experienced.
Yeah.
So it's not something that's happening right now, or it has happened, it's going to happen to us. But we know from the 1st and the 2nd quarter, the employment numbers that have been actually quite startling, right? Unemployment rate as high as it is at the moment. And that reflects really what has been happening, because obviously if you're not producing, it means you're not hiring people. If you're not moving forward, not more people are actually entering the economy. And I think that is exactly the reflection of what is happening in our economy. So people are struggling to find jobs, to find work, because we're not producing. And that's the problem that we have. Of course, people are not investing as much as they should. They don't trust the economy. They don't as much as they should, investors, that is. And that's a negative thing, right? Because actually, in its basic form, we want people to be employed, to be working, to be earning incomes, so that they can be able to feed their children, clothe themselves, and also just, reach their best potential.
Yeah, it's a difficult position to find ourselves in, and when you find yourself in a difficult position, the first thing you want to do is blame someone. And as we had seen a bit earlier, the Citizen having on the front page of the newspaper, we're blaming Zuma. And the Zuma years cost South Africa 1 trillion rand. And, we're attributing all of this onto him. Fair or not fair?
Well, there is a fair part to it. So if we look at this recession, so there are 3 parts that that actually contracted alarmingly. The first one is agriculture. Agriculture is what the agricultural economists are calling tail ends or tailwinds. So basically, the remnants of the drought. And that you can't blame Zuma. I mean, there's nothing you can do, I guess, except that we actually failed to prepare for droughts. Even in the past 10 years, in the past 20 years, because droughts are things that we can expect. We understand them very well. We have climatologists. I mean, we hear weather reports. These are people who can tell us that we will face a drought every so many years and all of that. So we should have had the kind of protections in terms of irrigation, storage of water, drought-resistant crops. All these kinds of things that prepare any civilized society from this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So partly to blame, because I suppose for the period that this was happening, he was president. But I think the biggest one is what we're seeing in the government sector. The government sector has contracted, and that is because obviously all of us have been talking about government must rein in spending, we must cut spending. Government, we have all this rising debt, rising deficits. That cutting of spending, of course, is now showing up, because that kind of means that actually we are doing less and less in the government sector, which has been a very important part of the way we develop and the way we grow as a country. So And the reason for that, of course, is all sorts of things like the state capture problems, the overspending that we've done over the past 10 years. We've really literally left that so-called fiscal discipline. And that he definitely can be blamed for over the years that has been.
So we can never actually, we can never push that to the side. It's impossible because, this has been years and years of what we've gathered and reports that we're hearing of looting from state coffers and from SOEs, and we're seeing now the effects that it's been having on the South African economy. But also, we need to understand that we are part of a basket of emerging markets, and when you look at emerging markets as well, they are not doing well. How much of an effect is this having on our economy and the issue of recession?
That's the exact same difficulty, of course, that we are happy to be emerging markets, right? Because emerging markets are growing, and sometimes people give us, investment because we're emerging markets. They associate with China, and they think, well, they are also part of this group, here's some money. But then at the same time, when emerging markets are doing badly, they take away their money. And that has been the serious effect that it has had on our currency at the very least. But also our other economic partners. Britain, for example, is a huge partner for us, both for investment and for trade. And this Brexit episode is one that actually has been very difficult for them, and that it's affecting us, right? Because our produce are going to a country that's in trouble, that they can't invest as much as they would, even though, we saw Theresa May coming over and saying, well, I pledge this, we pledge this. But certainly, these kinds of troubles are actually affecting us. I think also part of the big problem is our manufacturing sector and how we have not been able really to prop it up. We talk about manufacturing all the time. We say it's going to be the place where we're going to create jobs. But then it continues to contract. And so something is happening between what we think is policy or what we are saying with our mouths and what we are actually doing in practice to make sure that actually we are a manufacturing country, we are a manufacturing export country. And that is probably one of the greater problems that will keep us back for some time to come, because manufacturing for any nation is quite important.
So, on the screen we've actually got some of the figures and the look of where we're at in terms of some of the industries and the different contractual things we've seen. Mining increased to 4.9%, but the biggest drag on economic growth, which you mentioned, was agriculture, forestry and fisheries, and that decreased by 29.2%. So you've spoken about drought already. I want to talk about land, because I can imagine that the principle of expropriation of land without compensation and all of the uncertainty around that is also having an effect. Is it or isn't it? Let's get your opinion.
And I agree, Leanne, this is an important part, the uncertainty. Because I think all of us agree we need reform.
Absolutely.
And that is an important thing, and we can't go back on that. But certainly, the uncertainty that is creating is a major drag. So we need to work very, very fast to actually clarify the environment, to say, well, this is going to be the principle under which we work, this is the legal status of this situation, so that people understand where it's going and they can plan properly and move on. And this is part of the problem, that any investor who thinks, well, actually, I want to start a farm, or I want to start a manufacturing farm that will actually, maybe make mangoes into mango juice and export. They're not quite sure now. So you need to give them some certainty that this is the kind of expropriation, it will only affect these kinds of people and this kind of farming, and therefore you can participate in this way or that way. That's a very important clarification point that we need to do, and do it quickly. It is true of all our policy that while we understand that policies are important to take us forward, what we need to do is to actually kill the uncertainty so that people can actually start working and start investing. So, and I think sometimes people say these things because they want to hold us back. No, the reforms are very important, they're critical. But at the same time, they must be done efficiently, effectively, and very speedily. Speedily
and fairly, I imagine, because that's something. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next hour as well, the issue of land and looking at that drop in agriculture. Let's talk about President Ramaphosa very quickly, because we've spoken about our former President Jacob Zuma and the bad governments in there, and we're seeing what happened there. But some people on social media are not very happy with what's happening under the leadership of Ramaphosa, and that Ramaphoria is suddenly disappearing. Is it fair to say that? I'm asking you this. Is he doing enough? Is he on the right track? Or is he not being aggressive enough? What do you think?
Look, I think that, he has spoken the right language, but it's always the one thing to say the right things. It's quite another to actually accelerate to do the right things. People, for example, on social media were saying about the big con where he said, well, let's see what we can do about inflation in terms of fuel and all these, increase in prices. At the same time, we haven't heard a lot coming through from that. So I think that's going to be a big issue for him, in the sense that, it's one thing to make the promises, it's quite another to actually implement. It really goes to that same thing about how does he accelerate and implement as quickly as possible all the things that he promised. And I think that is going to be a key challenge. Even when we think about reforms at SOEs, those reforms are good to come in, but the SOEs must actually start working and work quickly, because they are actually part of a very important part of how we actually succeed. ESCOM is an important part of how we do energy and we bring in people. It's the same thing with our transport services, Transnet and all of these groupings. So we have to work very fast. I think he is unfortunately caught up in the remnants of what his predecessor had to do. But also it's easy to forgive him, right? But he was deputy president for the longest time.
Absolutely.
And so it's not, so part
He's
of
not coming in as a stranger.
Exactly.
He was too IC at the time.
Exactly. So he must take some responsibility, and he must have some insight about some of the things that, if he reviews some of the decisions that were taken in cabinet during the term he was there, and say, look, what did we do wrong? Our policy was already do wrong implementation-wise, and how do we actually change that? That's going to be very important for him. Very,
very important indeed. Just finally, and if you could do this very quickly, we're in China, we're signing all of these agreements. Some people worried about this, saying that, we've been colonized. It's almost like another colonization of Africa, but this time by China. We need the money, we need the jobs, we need the infrastructure. Is this the right way of doing it?
And I think, Leon, it really goes to one thing, how we negotiate with China. We've got to have to say, look, we are more than needing the money, but how do we negotiate that we also get the best outcomes out of this deal? That's, for me, the simplest thing, because we have done some really bad deals. When we talk about being colonized, those were bad deals. I mean, sometimes, obviously, we were shut down, but for the most part, it was because we didn't actually negotiate for our best outcomes. This should be the opportunity now to say we're going to turn things around. We now have, as President Ramaphosa says, we have an equal partner. If we have an equal partner, then we can have equal outcomes from this.
All right, we'll leave it there. Xhanti Payi, thank you so much for talking to us, as always, giving it to us as it is and making us understand what's going on. So I hope that's helped you understand the technical recession that we, as South Africa, are now officially in after those numbers were released yesterday. Let's take a break. We'll have your news at 7 after this. Do stay tuned.